The distant moonlight filtered through the observation ports of the Valara research vessel, casting elongated shadows across the sleek laboratory floors. Daniel Kane stood with his back pressed against the cold examination table, his heart hammering against his ribs. The clinical corridors beyond the lab were silent, save for the occasional beep of monitoring equipment and the soft hum of the ship's engines as it traveled through space toward the capital city. "Remove your shirt for the scan, Subject Kane," Sistema said, her voice cool and detached as she adjusted settings on a holographic display. Her slender fingers moved with practiced precision, each gesture triggering a new array of lights across the monitoring equipment. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw set in defiance. "I have a name. It's Daniel, not Subject Kane." Sistema's eyes, unnaturally bright against her pale skin, flickered up to meet his. "Protocol dictates subjects are referred to by designation. Now, your shirt, please." From behind a one-way observation panel, Rainey watched the exchange with thinly veiled contempt. Her features mirrored Sistema's. They were sisters, after all. But where Sistema maintained clinical distance, Rainey's expression was openly dismissive. "He's too small to matter," she muttered into her comm unit, knowing Sistema could hear her through her neural implant. Just another unaugmented human who thinks his autonomy matters more than progress. Daniel couldn't hear Rainey's comment, but he saw Sistema's brief pause, the almost imperceptible tightening of her lips. Something had been said about him. His fingers hesitated at the hem of his shirt before he slowly pulled it over his head, revealing skin that bore the marks of previous experiments, faint scars that told stories of other labs, other scientists. "Satisfactory," Sistema said, but her gaze lingered on the scars, longer than protocol would dictate. "Sama, begin tactile mapping sequence." A disembodied voice responded from overhead speakers. "Initiating tactile sequence. Sistema." Mechanical arms descended from the ceiling, each tipped with sensors that began to map the contours of Daniel's chest, shoulders, and back. He flinched as the cold metal touched his skin, but held his position. "You've been through this before," Sistema observed. Not a question, but a statement based on his scars and controlled reactions. "Different methods, same objectification," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the discomfort. "What exactly are you looking for this time? Neural compatibility, genetic resilience, or just how much a human can endure before breaking?" Sistema approached him, her steps measured and precise. "We are conducting compatibility trials. Your neural patterns show unusual resistance to standard override protocols. This makes you interesting." "Lucky me," Daniel said dryly. The tactile mapping continued in silence for several minutes. When it was complete, Sistema reviewed the data on her display, her expression revealing nothing. "Prepare for emotional sync testing," she instructed Sama. Then, to Daniel, "This will be uncomfortable. Your resistance will only prolong the process." "Why tell me? Why not just force compliance like the others?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious despite his situation. Sistema's gaze met his again, this time with a hint of something unreadable. "Forced compliance yields unreliable data. Your willing participation, even grudgingly given, provides cleaner results." Behind the observation panel, Rainey snorted. "She's getting soft on him already." Sistema always had a weakness for the defiant ones. The emotional sync test began without further warning. Images flashed before Daniel's eyes, scenes designed to provoke fear, anger, desire, joy, while sensors monitored his neural responses. Sistema watched the incoming data with growing interest, occasionally making notes on her display. "Fascinating," she murmured as a particular pattern emerged. "You're redirecting emotional triggers through intellectual pathways. How did you learn to do that?" Daniel managed a tight smile through the discomfort. "Self-preservation. When they're digging around in your head, You learned to build walls. Yet here you are again, subject to another trial. Sistema pointed out. Not by choice, Daniel retorted. Your Velaran guards made that quite clear when they extracted me from my research post. Sistema's expression flickered, with something that might have been discomfort, before settling back into clinical detachment. The selection process is beyond my purview. I simply conduct the trials. Convenient, Daniel said. The testing continued for hours, with Daniel's resistance becoming more evident as fatigue set in. When Sistema finally called an end to the day's trials, he slumped against the examination table, exhausted but unbroken. Take him to containment. Sistema instructed the Valoran guards who entered at her command. Standard protocols, but ensure he receives nutrition and adequate rest. Tomorrow's trials require optimal baseline readings. As the guards led Daniel away, Rainey emerged from behind the observation panel, her eyes fixed on her sister. You're being excessively careful with this one. The data would come faster if we pushed harder. And be less reliable, Sistema countered, shutting down her displays. His neural architecture is unlike anything we've mapped before. Rushing would be wasteful. Rainey circled the examination table, trailing her fingers along its surface where Daniel had stood. He's just another human, sister. Unaugmented, limited, temporary. Why the fascination? It's not fascination. It's scientific rigor, Sistema replied. But her gaze lingered on the doorway through which Daniel had disappeared. Tomorrow we begin Trial Alpha. Prepare the enhanced monitoring systems. Rainey smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Now we'll see how special he really is. Daniel spent the night in a sterile containment cell, lying on a narrow cot while contemplating the ceiling. The Velaran ship hummed around him, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. Yet, something about Sistema's demeanor had caught his attention. Unlike other scientists who had used him as a test subject, she seemed genuinely interested in his responses, not just in breaking through them. It was a small distinction, but in his position, small distinctions were all he had. Morning came abruptly, with the cell's lighting shifting from dim to bright. A panel slid open, revealing a nutrition packet and hydration cube. As Daniel consumed the tasteless sustenance, the door to his cell opened to reveal two Velaran guards. Trial Alpha begins in 30 minutes, one announced. You will prepare yourself. The guards escorted him to a preparation room, where sanitized clothing awaited. Daniel changed, noting the embedded sensors in the fabric, more sophisticated than those from yesterday's trials. Whatever Trial Alpha entailed, they wanted comprehensive data. When he entered the lab, he found it transformed. Additional equipment lined the walls, and a central platform now dominated the space, surrounded by what appeared to be neural interface nodes. Sistema stood beside the platform, reviewing data with a technical analyst Daniel hadn't seen before. The analyst, presumably Seema, whom he'd only heard as a voice yesterday, was physically similar to Sistema and Rainey, confirming his suspicion that the Valarans employed familial units in their research teams. Subject Kane, Sistema acknowledged his arrival. Are you adequately rested? Daniel approached the platform cautiously. As well as one can rest while being held captive. Captivity is a matter of perspective, Sistema replied. You are participating in research that will advance both our species. Involuntary participation isn't participation, it's exploitation, Daniel countered. From her position at a control console, Rainey spoke up. Your consent was implied when your species entered into the Velaran Accord. Section 7, Paragraph 18. Scientific exchange shall include biological compatibility studies as deemed necessary by either party. Daniel's laugh was sharp and without humor. I must have missed the referendum where ordinary humans voted on being abducted for compatibility studies. Politics is inefficient, Rainey dismissed. Progress requires directness. Sistema intervened before the exchange could escalate. Trial Alpha 1 will establish baseline synchronicity between your neural patterns and our interface systems. Please step onto the platform. Daniel hesitated, then complied, knowing resistance at this point would only lead to forced compliance. As he stood on the platform, neural interface nodes rose around him, their tips glowing with pale blue light. "These will not penetrate," Sistema assured him, noticing his tension. "They map neural pathways externally." "For now," Daniel muttered. "Initiating Trial Alpha 1, Sima announced, and the nodes began to emit a humming sound that resonated through Daniel's body. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced before. Not painful, but deeply unsettling, as though someone were gently rearranging his thoughts. Images flickered through his mind, places he'd never been, faces he'd never seen, emotions he couldn't quite grasp. "Remarkable resilience," Sistema noted, watching the data stream across her display. "Most subjects experience disorientation or distress at this stage." Daniel focused on maintaining his composure, using the mental walls he'd built over years of similar experiments to compartmentalize the intrusion. "Practice makes perfect," he managed to say through gritted teeth. The trial continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. When the humming finally ceased, Daniel found himself sweating and trembling slightly, but still standing. "Trial Alpha 1 complete," Sima announced. "Neural mapping successful. Compatibility rating 78.3%, significantly above threshold." Rainey's expression darkened. "That's impossible. Unaugmented humans rarely exceed 40%. Sistema's eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "It appears our selection algorithms were more effective than anticipated. Prepare for Trial Alpha 2. "Already?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. "Don't I get a break to recover?" "Your recovery metrics indicate you are within acceptable parameters for continued testing," Sistema replied, but there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. "However, a brief hydration period would not compromise the protocol." She gestured, and Sima brought forth a hydration cube, which Daniel gratefully accepted. As he consumed it, he noticed Rainey watching him with narrowed eyes, clearly displeased by the small concession. "Trial Alpha 2 involves emotional synchronization," Sistema explained as Daniel finished the hydration cube. "The nodes will stimulate specific emotional centers in your brain while monitoring your responses." "Emotional synchronization?" Daniel repeated skeptically. "You mean you're going to try to make me feel what you want me to feel?" "Precisely," Sistema confirmed without apology. "Emotional compatibility is crucial for the next phase of trials." Before Daniel could question what the next phase entailed, the nodes around him began to glow again, this time with a warmer, amber light. Immediately, he felt a wave of artificial calm wash over him, followed by a progression of emotions: contentment, mild amusement, curiosity, and then, unexpectedly, desire. The desire hit him like a physical force, not general arousal, but specifically directed desire that fixed itself on Sistema as she monitored the trial. Daniel fought against it, recognizing it as an artificial implantation. But the feeling was overwhelming, making his heart race and his skin flush. "Emotional imprinting successful," Sima reported. "Subject showing 92.7% receptivity to directed emotional stimuli." Through the haze of artificial desire, Daniel saw Sistema's composure falter for the first time. Her eyes widened slightly, and a faint blush colored her cheeks as she observed his reaction. "This is too effective," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "Reduce intensity by 30%. "That would invalidate the trial parameters," Rainey objected. "We need to know if he can sustain full emotional synchronization." "And if he can't?" Sistema challenged. "If we push too hard and damage his neural architecture, we lose a valuable subject." Rainey's lips curved in a cold smile. There are always more humans. Sister. Daniel, struggling against the imposed emotions, managed to lock eyes with Sistema. She doesn't see me as a person, he said, his voice strained. Do you? The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment, genuine uncertainty crossed Sistema's face. Then she straightened, resuming her clinical demeanor. Reduce intensity by 15%, she ordered. A compromise that made Rainey scowl, but didn't prompt further objection. The crushing weight of artificial desire eased slightly, allowing Daniel to regain some mental clarity. He took deep breaths, focusing on separating the imposed emotions from his authentic ones, a technique he'd developed during previous experiments. His resistance is impressive, Sistema observed, studying the data. He's creating mental partitions to isolate the artificial stimuli. Rainey moved closer to the platform, her eyes cold as she examined Daniel. Or perhaps the stimuli aren't entirely artificial to him. She glanced meaningfully at her sister. Perhaps he already harbored certain inclinations. Daniel maintained his composure, refusing to give Rainey the satisfaction of a response. Instead, he directed his words to Sistema. Whatever you're looking for, this isn't the way to find it. True compatibility can't be manufactured or forced. It has to be discovered. An appealingly romantic notion, Rainey mocked, but scientifically unsound. Compatibility is quantifiable, measurable, and, most importantly, manipulable. Trial Alpha 2 complete, Seema announced as the amber glow faded from the nodes. Overall synchronization rate, 87.2%. Sistema reviewed the final data, her expression thoughtful. These results exceed expectations. We should proceed with caution. Or we should accelerate, Rainey countered. With synchronization rates this high, we could move directly to Trial Alpha 3. Sistema's head snapped up. That would be premature. The protocol specifies a minimum 24-hour recovery period before Alpha 3. The protocol allows for acceleration in cases of exceptional compatibility, Rainey insisted. You've always been too cautious, sister. This is why your research progresses so slowly. Daniel watched the exchange with growing unease. What exactly is Trial Alpha 3? Neither sister answered him directly, but Sistema's reluctance and Rainey's eagerness told him enough. Whatever Alpha 3 entailed, it was significantly more intense than what he'd already endured. After a tense silence, Sistema finally spoke. Prepare for Trial Alpha 3, she said, her voice carefully controlled. But we will proceed with modified parameters, reduced intensity, increased monitoring, and immediate termination if the subject's vital signs indicate distress. Rainey's smile was triumphant. I'll make the preparations. Seema, assist me. As they left to configure the equipment, Daniel found himself alone with Sistema for the first time. She approached the platform, standing close enough that he could see the subtle variations in her iris pattern. Not quite human, but beautiful in their complexity. What is Trial Alpha 3? He asked again, his voice low. Sistema hesitated, then replied with unexpected candor. It tests physical and emotional compatibility under stress conditions. Specifically, under conditions of extreme heat. Heat? Daniel repeated, confused. Velorans evolved on a world with periodic temperature spikes, she explained. Our bodies adapted to synchronize with compatible partners during these events, ensuring mutual survival. The trial simulates these conditions. Understanding dawned on Daniel, bringing with it a new level of apprehension. It's a mating trial, he said flatly. Sistema's gaze didn't waver. It measures compatibility potential, not actual mating. But yes, the physiological responses monitored are those associated with intimate connections. And your sister wants to rush into this because she believes you'll fail, Sistema said simply. Your earlier resilience threatens her assumptions about human limitations, A failure in Alpha 3 would validate her perspective. Daniel studied her face, searching for any hint of deception. "And what do you believe?" Before Sistema could answer, Rainey and Seema returned. The lab's temperature had already begun to rise noticeably, and new equipment had been wheeled in, including what appeared to be restraints for the platform. "Trial Alpha 3 requires stability control," Rainey explained, with cold satisfaction, when she saw Daniel eyeing the restraints. "Subjects often experience involuntary movements during peak responses." Daniel looked to Sistema, who nodded slightly. "The restraints are safety measures, not punitive." With reluctance, Daniel allowed himself to be secured to the platform. The restraints were firm, but not painful, holding him in place while still allowing some movement. As the final preparations were made, he noticed something odd. The lab's recording systems were being adjusted. "This portion will be conducted off-record," Rainey announced, confirming his observation. "Standard protocol for alpha trials involving intimate response mapping." "Off-record?" Daniel questioned. "That seems convenient." "It protects both subject and researcher privacy," Sistema explained, though her tone suggested this wasn't the entire truth. Once the preparations were complete, Rainey and Seema moved to monitoring stations at the periphery of the lab, leaving Sistema alone beside Daniel's platform. The neural interface nodes had been replaced with more sophisticated units that now hovered just above his skin, not quite touching. "Trial Alpha 3 commencing," Seema announced. "Current temperature, 32 degrees Celsius, rising to target of 40 degrees. The heat built gradually but inexorably. Daniel felt sweat begin to bead on his forehead and chest, his breathing becoming deeper as his body worked to regulate his temperature. Beside him, Sistema showed no discomfort. Her Velaran physiology clearly adapted to such conditions. "Neural synchronization initiating," Seema reported. "Establishing baseline connections." The nodes above Daniel began to glow with a deep, pulsing red light. As they activated, he felt an immediate and intense awareness of Sistema, not just her physical presence, but something deeper, as though he could sense the rhythm of her thoughts, the cadence of her emotions. From her sudden sharp intake of breath, he knew she was experiencing something similar. "Synchronization at 45% and climbing." Seema's voice seemed distant now, less relevant than the growing connection between Daniel and Sistema. The lab's temperature continued to rise, reaching 35 degrees, then 37. Daniel's skin glistened with sweat, his heart rate elevating in response to both the heat and the intensifying neural connection. Through that connection, he sensed Sistema's growing struggle to maintain her professional detachment. Vital signs aligned, Rainey observed, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. "They're mirroring each other." The observation was accurate. Daniel's heartbeat had synchronized with Sistema's, their breathing falling into the same pattern. More than that, he could feel her internal conflict, her scientist's curiosity, warring with personal responses she'd likely never experienced before. "Temperature at 39 degrees, Seema reported. "Neural synchronization at 78% and stabilizing." Daniel found himself fighting not against the imposed connection, but against his own response to it. Despite the artificial nature of the situation, there was something undeniably genuine in the way Sistema's presence resonated within him. When their eyes met, he saw the same realization reflected in her gaze. "This is—" Sistema began, her voice uncommonly unsteady. "Real," Daniel finished for her. "Despite everything, there's something real happening." The temperature reached its target of 40 degrees. The lab felt like a sauna now, the air thick and difficult to breathe. Daniel's restraints no longer seemed necessary. He had no desire to move away from the platform, away from Sistema. "Neural synchronization at 92%, Seema announced, unable to keep the amazement from her voice. "Physical responses aligned at 89%. Rainey's voice cut through the haze. Something's wrong. These readings can't be accurate. Check the calibration. Systems are functioning correctly, Seema confirmed after a moment. These are valid readings. Sistema moved closer to the platform, her hand hovering just above Daniel's chest. Through the neural connection, he felt her desire to touch him warring with years of scientific training that demanded objectivity. The protocol doesn't prohibit direct contact, she said, so quietly that only he could hear her. It's sometimes necessary for calibration purposes. Daniel's smile was strained but genuine. Is that what we're calling it? Her fingers made contact with his skin, and the effect was electric. The neural synchronization spiked, sending waves of pleasure and connection through both of them. Daniel gasped, his back arching against the restraints. Synchronization at 97%, Seema reported, her voice reflecting disbelief. Approaching mutual peak threshold. Rainey's voice was sharp with alarm. Terminate the trial. These readings indicate a danger zone. No, Sistema countermanded, her voice firm despite the intensity of what she was experiencing. The subject is not in distress. Continue monitoring. Her hand remained on Daniel's chest, her touch both gentle and incredibly potent due to their neural connection. Through that connection, he sensed her growing beyond the confines of her training, her prescribed role, into something more authentic. Temperature holding at 40 degrees, Seema reported. Physiological responses continuing to escalate. The heat, the neural connection, and Sistema's touch combined to create an overwhelming sensory experience. Daniel found himself unable to maintain his usual mental walls, not because they were being forcibly breached, but because he was willingly lowering them. I've never, Sistema began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. Neither have I, Daniel responded, understanding what she couldn't articulate. This connection, artificial as its origins might be, had transcended the experiment to become something neither of them had experienced before. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, a decision was made that had nothing to do with protocols or trials. Sistema leaned down, her face inches from his, hesitating only briefly before closing the distance. Their lips met in a kiss that sent the neural synchronization readings off the scale. 100% synchronization, Seema exclaimed. Mutual peak achieved. The lab systems responded to the unprecedented readings with alarm klaxons. Lights flickered as power surged through the neural interface nodes, which now glowed with an intensity that cast Sistema and Daniel in crimson light. Rainey's voice cut through the chaos. Sistema! What are you doing? This violates every protocol! But Sistema didn't break the kiss, didn't pull away. Through their neural connection, Daniel felt her liberation, a casting off of constraints she hadn't even recognized until this moment. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily. The lab systems were in disarray. Several monitors had shut down, unable to process the intensity of the data they'd received. The neural interface nodes flickered erratically, their programming overwhelmed. Trial Alpha 3 has been judged a failure, announced a synthetic voice, the system judge, programmed to evaluate trial outcomes. Incompatibility detected. Protocol violation recorded. Rainey approached, her expression a mixture of shock and vindication. The system judge has spoken. This confirms what I said from the beginning. He's too small to matter. But Sistema's attention remained fixed on Daniel, her hand still resting on his chest. The system judge is wrong, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This wasn't a failure. It was a breakthrough. A breakthrough? Rainey scoffed. You compromised yourself and the entire trial with unprofessional conduct. I discovered something the protocol wasn't designed to measure, Sistema countered. Genuine compatibility isn't about control or dominance. It's about mutual choice. As they argued, Daniel became aware of a growing problem. The neural interface nodes, destabilized by the intense synchronization, were beginning to emit erratic energy pulses. One of these pulses struck Sistema, making her wince in pain. "The system is overloading," he warned, pulling against his restraints. "You need to shut it down before—" Another pulse, stronger this time, hit Sistema squarely. She staggered, her neural implants visibly glitching as the energy interfered with their normal function. "Sama, emergency shutdown," Rainey ordered, moving to support her sister. Unable to comply, Seema responded, frantically working her console. "The system judge has locked out manual controls as part of failure protocols." Daniel assessed the situation quickly. "The nodes are channeling feedback into her neural implants. If it continues, it could cause permanent damage." Rainey shot him a hostile glare. "This is your fault. If you hadn't—" "Blame won't help her," Daniel cut in. "Listen to me. I've seen this kind of system before. There's a fail-safe. But it requires external override." "What kind of override?" Seema asked, desperation evident in her voice. "The system judge operates on binary outcomes, success or failure," Daniel explained rapidly. "We need to give it a third option, something it can't categorize." Despite her obvious pain, Sistema understood. Ambiguity. The system can't process gray areas. Daniel nodded. "Exactly. Release my restraints. I can create the override, but I need physical access to the main control node." Rainey hesitated, clearly torn between distrust of Daniel and fear for her sister. Another energy pulse struck Sistema, causing her to cry out in pain, and Rainey's decision was made. "Release him," she ordered Seema, who immediately complied. The moment the restraints retracted, Daniel moved to the central control panel. His fingers flew over the interface, bypassing security protocols with surprising ease. "How do you know our systems?" Rainey demanded as she supported Sistema, who was now struggling to remain conscious. "I'm not just a test subject," Daniel replied without looking up from his work. "Before your people recruited me, I was researching neural interface technologies. Ironically, for compatibility applications." He continued working, creating a feedback loop in the system that would force the system judge to process contradictory inputs simultaneously. It was a hack, but an elegant one, exploiting the fundamental limitations of binary judgment systems. "There," he said finally, initiating the override sequence. "This should—" The neural interface nodes froze mid-pulse, their glow fading to a dull amber. The system judge's voice emerged once more, but now distorted and confused. "Trial outcome? Recalibrating. Parameters insufficient for categorization. Defaulting to neutral status." The energy pulses ceased, and Sistema slumped in relief, her neural implants gradually returning to normal function. Daniel moved to her side, checking her condition with genuine concern. "Your implants should stabilize once the system fully resets," he told her. "No permanent damage, from what I can see." Rainey watched this exchange with new eyes, her previous contempt giving way to reluctant reassessment. "You could have escaped," she noted. "When I ordered your release, you could have tried to flee." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "To what end? We're on an orbital ship, and even if I somehow reached a shuttle, where would I go? Besides—" He glanced at Sistema. "I wouldn't leave her like that." The lab was silent, save for the soft hum of equipment resetting itself. The crisis had passed, but its implications lingered. Something fundamental had changed, not just in the trial outcomes, but in the dynamic between the three of them. Sistema straightened, regaining her composure though still leaning slightly on Rainey for support. "The trial protocols are flawed," she stated. "They're designed to measure and enforce compatibility without considering the element of choice." "Choice is inefficient," Rainey argued, but with less conviction than before. "Choice is essential," Sistema countered. "What we experienced," she glanced at Daniel, What we discovered today proves that true compatibility cannot be forced or manufactured. It must be chosen, freely given. Chema, who had been monitoring the resetting systems, spoke up. The trial data, despite the system failure, is remarkable. The synchronization levels achieved were unprecedented. Because they were genuine, Daniel said simply. Rainey released her sister, stepping back to regard both of them with a complex expression. So what happens now? The system judge declared the trial a failure, but you claim it was a breakthrough. Which report do I submit to the directorate? Sistema straightened fully, her decision evident in her posture. Submit both. Let them confront the same contradiction their system couldn't process. Perhaps it's time our research methodology evolved. They'll recall you for realignment, Rainey warned. Your research privileges could be revoked. Then that's the price of discovery, Sistema replied calmly. Daniel, watching this exchange, realized he was witnessing something significant, a shift in power, in understanding, that extended beyond their immediate circumstances. What about him? Rainey asked, gesturing toward Daniel. Standard protocol after a failed trial is subject repatriation. Sistema turned to Daniel, her expression open in a way it hadn't been before. That would be his choice. The word hung in the air between them, choice, a concept so simple yet revolutionary in this context. Daniel considered his options. Return to Earth, to his interrupted research, his ordinary life, or remain here, exploring this unexpected connection, this new territory. I'd like to stay, he said finally. There's more research to be done on both sides. Sistema's smile was small but genuine. Then we have work to do. As the lab systems completed their reset, the three of them stood in a triangle of new understanding. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably, Sistema and Daniel connected by their shared experience. Rainey challenged in her assumptions, yet curious about what she'd witnessed. He's not too small after all, Rainey admitted quietly to her sister as they left the lab together. Daniel walking ahead with Seema to discuss system modifications. What you experienced with him? I saw it change you. Sistema's gaze followed Daniel's retreating form. It wasn't about size, or strength, or any of the metrics we've been measuring. It was about something we haven't been looking for. And what was that? Rainey asked. Recognition, Sistema replied. Seeing and being seen, beyond protocols and designations, choosing and being chosen. The sisters walked in silence for a moment, the ship's corridors stretching before them toward an uncertain future. I want to understand, Rainey said finally, surprising herself with the admission. What you felt. I want to know what that's like. Sistema took her sister's hand, a gesture of unity they hadn't shared since childhood. Then perhaps it's time for new trials, not to measure or control, but to discover. As they reached the end of the corridor, the ship's observation ports revealed their destination below, the gleaming spires of the Valaran capital city, bathed in morning light. The future awaited them there, full of questions and possibilities that no protocol could predict or contain. Together, human and Valaran, scientist and subject, sisters and strangers, they stepped toward it, united by the most powerful force in any universe, the freedom to choose.